"Give me some water," my 5-year-old grandson said as he stumbled into my house after walking for 2 hours in 105 degrees Fahrenheit heat. His face was beet red, and sweat was pouring down like a waterfall. Confused, I asked, "Where's your mom?" He burst into tears and said, "She's all dried up at home." I rushed to my daughter's house. There, I found her emaciated and collapsed. I quickly embraced her unresponsive body and called an ambulance, crying. My husband passed away in an accident when our daughter was 5 years old. People often suggested to me, "Why don't you remarry?" But I couldn't bring myself to do that and focused on raising my daughter, Dakota. She married a man named Ian when she was 29. While I felt relieved that my duty was somewhat complete, something bothered me. Ian seemed to care for Dakota very much, but it felt a bit excessive. After their marriage, the couple rented a house about a 20-minute drive from our place. Within 6 months, Dakota announced her pregnancy. I was overjoyed at the thought of becoming a grandmother and couldn't wait to meet my grandchild. When Dakota was about 8 months pregnant, I visited her house. She seemed to be deep in thought, her brow furrowed. "Why the long face?" I asked, worried. "Ian's job includes night shifts, right?" I started thinking about what I'd do if labor started when he wasn't around, and it scared me. It was her first pregnancy, so I suppose once she started thinking about it, one worry led to another. "I understand why you're anxious. Hey, why don't you come stay with me when you're close to your due date?" "Of course, only if Ian agrees." I thought my presence might ease my daughter's mind a bit. I glanced at Ian as I made the suggestion. Ian immediately frowned. "That's out of the question. This is exactly when a couple should be together and support each other." He raised his voice more than I'd ever heard before. "It's okay, I don't need to go back home. I have things to take care of here." Dakota quickly smoothed things over. But Ian glared at me and muttered, "Don't say unnecessary things just because you want to be with Dakota." From the time they were dating, Ian's love for her seemed heavy, or rather, he appeared to dote on her excessively. He would get incredibly worried if he couldn't contact Dakota for even a short while, and he called me more than once or twice about it. However, Dakota didn't seem to find it stifling, so I thought if they were happy, there was no problem, and I watched over them. Dakota reached full term and ended up not coming to stay with me. As luck would have it, her labor started on Ian's day off, and she gave birth safely. The baby had been shy in the womb, hiding the important parts with its feet, so we didn't know the gender until birth. A healthy baby boy was born, named Ethan. He's adorable. "Dakota, you really did well," I said words of encouragement to my daughter as she lovingly held her child when I visited the hospital. However, when I looked to the side, Ian had an unhappy expression. I thought Ian must be tired too, as I'd heard he had been holding Dakota's hand throughout her labor. "I wanted a girl." "What did you say?" I thought I must have misheard Ian's mumbled complaint. "I said, I didn't want a boy." He stood up from his chair and raised his voice. "Rather than the gender, we should be grateful that the baby was born healthy," I said to Ian, surprised. He muttered, "You're right," but for some reason, he looked sulky. Still, I wasn't too worried, thinking he would come to understand the cuteness of his child as they lived together. After Dakota was discharged from the hospital, I often went to my daughter's house to help with household chores and childcare. One day, I was surprised to see Ian not trying to soothe Ethan when he was fussy. Even when Dakota said, "Could you hold him for a bit?" Ian didn't even look up from his smartphone, pretending not to hear. I felt uncomfortable with his behavior and talked to my daughter about it. He seems to have been quite shocked that the baby wasn't a girl. But I think he'll come to love him soon. Are you sure you're okay? Dakota nodded with a slightly troubled face, but I worried that only her burden would increase. However, I heard that by the time Ethan was 6 months old, Ian was taking him for walks and even bathing him. I thought he had become a very good dad. Men take time to become parents, so I had high hopes for the future. I was completely at ease thinking this way. But that only lasted until Ethan turned 2. As Ethan grew, Ian began to show a cold attitude again, leaving all childcare to Dakota. Ethan was in the midst of his terrible twos at this time, so perhaps Ian got tired of it. I asked my daughter about his behavior. "He's just been busy with work lately and doesn't have much energy." He still loves Ethan. But isn't it wrong to be cold to a child just because you're tired? Dakota fell silent at my words. After a while, she mumbled sadly, "But Ethan loves Ian so much." Seeing her like that, I thought it wasn't good to interfere too much in my daughter's family affairs. She must have her own thoughts and considerations. From then on, I decided to only answer when asked for advice and otherwise just watch over them. Ethan grew up steadily and soon turned 5. During this time, Ian remained unchanged, seemingly indifferent to Ethan. Despite this, Ethan grew into a straightforward and kind child, always helping his mom. After Ethan's 5th birthday, there was a period when I couldn't see them for a while due to my poor health or Dakota's circumstances. Then, one day in August, it happened. The weather forecast said the temperature would rise to 105 degrees Fahrenheit, making it an extremely hot day. Thinking it was too hot to go out, I finished my housework and was drawing postcards, my hobby, in an air-conditioned room. Suddenly, I heard a knocking sound from the direction of the entrance. I thought it might be my imagination, but I decided to check anyway. When I opened the door, to my surprise, there stood Ethan. His face was bright red, and sweat was pouring down like a waterfall. "What's wrong? Can I have some water?" I quickly brought him inside and gave him water to drink. While wiping his sweat with a towel, I listened to his story. He had walked from his house to mine, a distance that would take 2 hours for his little legs. I walked in the shade under the trees, and I drank water at the park, so I'm okay, he said. But there's no doubt it was dangerous. "Where's your mom?" I asked him, thinking there was no way Dakota would let her 5-year-old child walk alone in the scorching midsummer heat. Ethan began to cry, tears rolling down his cheeks. "She's all dried up at home. She stopped moving. Grandma, please help." I couldn't understand the situation, but from Ethan's behavior as he tried to pull me outside, I sensed that something was seriously wrong. I decided to rush to my daughter's house immediately. As I drove the car, I tried to get more details from Ethan. He began to tell me something surprising. Although it was hard to believe at first, I drove with the sole intention of getting to Dakota as quickly as possible. When we arrived at my daughter's house, I let Ethan lead me to where Dakota was supposed to be. There, I found her lying on the living room floor, emaciated and covered in bruises. "Dakota, are you okay?" There was no response to my call, and I hurriedly called an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor who examined my daughter's condition had a grim expression. All I could do at that moment was pray that she would survive. I tried to call Ian to inform him about Dakota's situation, but he didn't answer no matter how many times I called. When I asked my grandson, he said Ian had been gone for about 2 days. What on earth was happening to my daughter's family? And anger welled up inside me towards the person who had done this to her. I felt I had to get to the bottom of this, so I sprang into action. The next day, I waited in front of Ian's workplace for him to come out. I had called his company in the morning when I still couldn't reach him, and they told me he was already at work. A few minutes after the end of the workday, he came out. "Ian, do you have a moment?" As soon as he saw me, Ian made a very annoyed expression, but I ignored it and approached him. "I can't get in touch with my daughter. Do you know anything?" "Huh? Oh, she's fine. She said she doesn't like you because you're too pushy. Did you have a fight or something?" He answered nonchalantly with a composed demeanor. Of course, I knew this was a lie, having seen my daughter's condition the day before. If he was going to respond like that, I decided to play along. I pretended to be shocked. "You interfere too much with Dakota. Isn't it because you're the kind of mother who calls me repeatedly and even shows up at my workplace just because you can't contact her for a little while?" Ian said dismissively, looking down on me, and started to smirk. I looked him straight in the eye. "I know everything." "Huh? What are you talking about?" "Ethan walked to my house yesterday in the heat. He said he wanted help for his mom." Then I told him about how Dakota was found collapsed, emaciated, and covered in bruises. "That's terrible. Maybe a burglar broke in while I was away." Ian feigned surprise with an exaggerated voice and looked at my face. "Oh. But Ethan said his dad hit his mom and left," I quickly retorted. Ian's expression hardened. Yes, it was Ian who had done such a terrible thing to Dakota. That was the surprising truth that Ethan had revealed to me in the car. Other employees coming out of the company were glancing at our conversation, wondering what was going on. Of course, this wasn't a coincidence. I had intentionally been talking about Ian's actions loudly enough for others to hear. Noticing this, Ian glanced at me while scratching his head. "What are you talking about? Did Ethan say that?" "He sometimes says nonsense things. You shouldn't take it seriously." Ian raised his voice, perhaps trying to appeal to those around us, in an exaggeratedly surprised tone. "You did it, didn't you?" I know everything now. How could I, who loves my wife, do such a thing? He maintained a strong attitude, trying to deny everything, saying, "Stop making false accusations." I took out my smartphone from my bag and decided to show Ian a certain video. "Can you still deny it after seeing this?" He stood with his mouth agape, unable to take his eyes off my smartphone screen. The video showed scenes of Ian being cold towards Ethan and throwing hurtful words at him. "Damn. You still had this video?" he muttered in surprise. Seeing that he had quieted down a bit, I decided to start Ian's punishment. "It seems Dakota couldn't stand your attitude towards your child anymore and was collecting evidence for divorce." "How do you know all this?" "So you hid my daughter when you found out you were about to be divorced, right?" As I pressed him, Ian stepped back and fell silent. My words caused the employees watching nearby to start murmuring. This seemed to bring Ian back to his senses. He desperately tried to correct himself. "That's not it. This is just discipline for Ethan. Isn't it normal for parents to want their children to grow up properly? The idea that I hit Dakota must be your delusion or something," he said with a snort. Since this was going nowhere, I presented a document to him. "Enough. What about this?" Ian stared at the paper, reading aloud the words, "medical certificate," written on it. "That's right. It says bone fracture and dehydration, doesn't it?" Ian was sweating, perhaps feeling cornered. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and asked me, "Huh? But Dakota is alive, right? How dare you ask that so lightly? It's the worst. Her life was in danger. Take the consequences of your actions more seriously." Thanks to the doctor's desperate treatment, my daughter had managed to survive and recovered enough to speak. That day, Ethan was staying with Dakota at the hospital, saying he wanted to be with his mom. The doctor in charge said she might have been hit with considerable force. Ian seemed to be thinking about something, staring at a single point. However, after a while, he burst out laughing. "It's all her fault. I'm not to blame at all." Ian started talking as if intoxicated with himself. Apparently, he liked my daughter's face and wanted a cute daughter who looked just like her. However, when the child turned out to be a boy, he was disappointed. Until the boy was about a year old, he looked like Dakota, so I thought I could love him and made some effort. I even bathed him a few times. "Then why did you start being harsh to Ethan again? Isn't it obvious?" He gradually started to look like me, becoming more masculine, and wasn't cute at all. I was speechless when I learned that he had been cold to Ethan for such an absurd reason. So I suggested putting Ethan up for adoption and having another child. We could keep trying until we had a girl. I felt terrified by Ian, who was grinning while casually talking about something unthinkable and horrifying by normal standards. But I couldn't show fear here, or I wouldn't be able to carry out his punishment. I took a deep breath to steel myself. But my daughter refused that proposal, right? Of course. There's no way she could accept such a suggestion. It was then that Dakota decided to leave Ian. From that point on, she had been working behind the scenes towards divorce, recording evidence on video and such. However, one day, Ian accidentally discovered a hidden camera set up in the living room. Moreover, he found an already filled-out divorce paper in a drawer. I was shocked. When I questioned my wife about what was going on, she said she was planning to leave me. I got furious at Dakota for bringing up divorce when I love her so much. Enraged, Ian hit Dakota, beating her badly while yelling, "Repent," and then left the house. Ian had also taken away Dakota's smartphone so she couldn't call for help. By the way, this happened 2 days before Ethan came to me for help. The video I showed you earlier was from another hidden camera. It seems Dakota was thorough in her preparations. How cunning. In the first place, it's because she dotes on Ethan that things went wrong. What's wrong with that? It's natural to dote on your own child. That's what I don't like. Ethan is always clinging to Dakota. Ian said this as if he was stating some obvious logic, without changing his expression. I was so shocked that I couldn't find the next words to say. What he was saying was nothing but jealousy. This man in front of me hadn't fully become a parent and seemed to be saying that he should be Dakota's #1 priority. On the contrary, Dakota was trying to fulfill her responsibility as a mother. Despite the pain all over her body from Ian's violence, she continued to smile and say, "I'm fine," so as not to worry Ethan. She desperately continued to take care of the child, but that day, the pain finally reached its limit, and she lost consciousness. For 2 days since being beaten, she hadn't been able to eat or drink anything. That's why she became so thin and emaciated, and was diagnosed with severe dehydration. In any case, Dakota's life was saved because Ethan came to me for help. Dakota is going to consult with the police and a lawyer. What? It's a marital issue. Isn't it weird to involve others? No, this is a proper crime. What you've done will be exposed to many people and judged under the law. Face the severity of your crime. At this point, he seemed to finally understand the situation he was in. But I didn't mean any harm. That's right, please persuade her. If you talk to her, she might change her mind. Ian clung to me, crying, but I pushed him away. He was muttering and hanging his head, but the punishment wasn't over yet. I had a final trump card. For someone who liked Dakota's face so much, you've done some pretty low things. Ha! I thrust several photos at Ian, who let out a stupid-sounding voice. As he stared intently at the photos, Ian froze, muttering incomprehensible words. You probably didn't think it would be exposed to this extent, did you? Even your affair. Those were evidence photos of Ian's infidelity. As it turns out, when my daughter was thoroughly investigating Ian, she discovered that he was having a relationship with another woman. Thinking it would be important for the divorce, she made sure to keep it as evidence. After you hit Dakota and left, you went to that woman's place, didn't you? I couldn't understand his nerve, how he could cheat while subjecting my daughter and grandson to such terrible treatment with his twisted love. It seems Dakota plans to demand compensation for the affair in addition to her medical expenses, so be prepared. Of course, there's child support for Ethan too. As soon as I mentioned money, he snapped back to reality and again clung to me, saying, "Please help me." But I had nothing more to say to him, so I ignored him and left the scene. Among the employees who had been watching, some applauded me, while others threw words like "pathetic" at Ian. After that, Dakota and Ian's divorce was successfully finalized. Dakota filed a police report, so Ian was questioned and then arrested. The case was later settled out of court. Dakota demanded a lump sum payment from Ian for the affair compensation, medical expenses, and child support, totaling $100,000. Ian apparently borrowed money from various sources to pay it. Because I had confronted him in front of his workplace, someone who witnessed it recorded and posted it on social media. It spread rapidly, and eventually, Ian's name was identified. As a result of this commotion, he was fired from his company and became unemployed. I heard rumors that he's now working day and night at day labor jobs to repay his debts. Dakota was safely discharged from the hospital and decided to move in with Ethan to my house. Ethan, who has been gradually regaining his energy in our daily life, takes care of Dakota despite his young age, making even us observers feel happy. From now on, I want to provide as much support as I can while prioritizing Dakota and Ethan's health and happiness.